Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. And I just realized I forgot to turn on my light. Here I've been sitting here this whole time getting ready, and I didn't do that yet. So just a minute. I'm going to let Atheist Enlightenment take this just slightly out of order from what we talked about, so that I can go do that in just a minute. But thank you everyone for joining me. And my guest today is Atheist Enlightenment. Thank you for coming, Atheist.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm
And
happy to be on your show.
what should we call you?
Well, if you want, you can call me Josh. That's perfectly fine.
Okay.
It's just that I wanted to have the name there, so just in case people wanted to check out the actual channel afterwards, that's where you can find me on the Atheist Enlightenment channel on YouTube.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to let you start out by telling people what your channel is, when you started it, and what it's all about, okay?
Thank you. Absolutely. So my channel is based on bringing forth what I look at is a nouveau enlightenment, in a sense, because I think if we look at atheism or atheists as a whole, right, I feel that there's certain things that might be missing, and I want to try to bring those things to the forefront of the atheist movement, right? And I think the best way in order to do that is to create, or not to create, but to have a nouveau enlightenment, which is there. And that's why I'm calling it the Atheist Enlightenment, because we've already had the Renaissance beforehand. We had the actual Enlightenment era, where we started growing within science and technology and modernization and so on and so forth. And then we had obviously our computer age today. But I feel that there is much more to reach for. And I think the Atheist Enlightenment would be the new stage, that new area where we can now move forward and really try to flush out what it means to be an atheist and how we can actually emulate that in the world as well, right? Because we have a great online community, but there's one thing that I see that might be lacking a bit is actually being on the ground, right? Doing things on the ground, creating charity works on the ground that make changes within people's lives. And that's what the Atheist Enlightenment is trying to bring forth, is these nouveau on the ground ways of thinking. So
Okay. And how long have you had your channel?
it has literally been, I believe, 2 months or 2 months and a half at this moment. Beforehand, I used to have another channel called the PSF. But afterwards, the team and I decided that it would be a good thing to have a cordial split. And I created the Atheist Enlightenment from that. So,
Okay. Right now, the Atheist Enlightenment channel has 19 subscribers. And the link to subscribe to that channel is in the description of this video. And in addition, I'm about to put it into the chat as well. And I would ask that everyone please go and subscribe. And let's see if by the end of this program, we can't get that number doubled. That is the goal for today, is to double the number of subscribers that Atheist Enlightenment has.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Greatly appreciate it.
And then with people who come on and watch this, not the live show, but later, please also go ahead and subscribe, and maybe we can get that even tripled or quadrupled by the end of the week.
Yeah,
and we'll get that channel off the ground.
Thank you so much, everybody who's subbing at this very moment. I do really appreciate it. And the whole entire reason why the Atheist Enlightenment is what it is and why I founded it in the first place is in order to create a great area for atheists to kind of just have discussions. And also, as I stated, create this new on the ground, on foot type of network. So again, thank you for subscribing. It's greatly appreciated. And Thank you.
And Mark Caesar says, how ironic. Atheist Enlightenment and godless Granny forgot to turn her lights on. And I want to say hello to everyone in the chat. We have a very good group today. We have Eric Mishima. We have Mark Caesar. We have Ring. We have Purple Rhymes with Orange. We have KCA Randy, Sandy, Claire, Robert X, Scott Worthington. Let's see. Is that everybody? That's everyone that I can see. If I did not say your name and you'd like me to say your name, just post something in the chat and I will say your name. It is great to have everyone on today, and it's nice to be on during the daytime instead of in the evening. I kind of like the daytime.
Agreed. I think the daytime is actually the best time to actually stream, even though that my streams are at 10 at night. But I mean, still, I think that just sometimes evening streams could be better because you get a whole new audience and people are not at work, right? Or it's near the end of the day, so that they're more in like the relaxation, want to hear something mode rather than rushing and trying to get whatever they're trying to get, right?
And Limited Light is here for 15 minutes. Thank you for coming, Limited Light. Ox is here. And my own personal troll, 20 July, is here to try to derail our train and get us to talk about what he wants to talk about instead of what we want to talk about. And that's too bad. We're just going to ignore him unless he chooses to get with the program and discuss what we are discussing. Let's see. Atheist Enlightenment, you are now up to 24 subscribers.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, we'll get you there. We will get you there.
Again, greatly appreciated.
Yeah. A couple of announcements that I have. I have a new video that is set to release at 3 p.m. today. So basically, as soon as we finish this program, if we finish on time, if we run late, it's the release of that one's going to actually overlap with this one a bit. That one is called Soul Survivor, The Evolution of Souls. And it's a response to a priest who thinks that humans are not hominid animals. Yeah, I had some fun with that one, mostly because I knew very little about primates and human evolution until I started listening to Erica Gutsick-Gibbon. And when I heard this priest talking, I thought, oh, I should get Erica to help me with this. And then I thought, no, you know what? I think I know enough now that I can do this all by myself. And so I did. And I'm really hoping I can get Erica to watch it and tell me whether or not I have now graduated from the Gutsick-Gibbon Academy of human primatology.
That is awesome. Yeah, I love when people or priests or whatever try to make some outlandish claim such as that, and after is this, let's tear apart the video and see how the logic really sits when torn apart properly, you know? So yeah, I agree. I love those type of videos.
And then on Wednesday, Drew, genetically modified skeptic, is supposed to be here. He told me he was coming, but unfortunately, since the Better Conference, I've tried to contact him several times, and I have not been able to get a hold of him to confirm. So I'm planning on him being here, but if he doesn't make it, it is what it is. But I think he's going to be coming on Wednesday.
Huh. Well, hopefully he comes through. Hopefully.
Yep, hopefully. Oh, and don't forget, tonight I will be appearing on Atheist Enlightenment's channel.
That is correct.
If you want to hear us again tonight, just come back at 9 p.m. Central Time, and we will be there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to actually have an in-depth discussion on free will. So that's going to be a really cool subject matter, because I've always wanted to understand the point of the free will argument. And I've tried, I've read through it and everything, and it just still, I don't know. It doesn't. I still can't get my head around it. So maybe having it explained to me by somebody who believes in free will might actually give me a new perspective on such a thought
Yeah,
process.
I do understand it quite well because I have been on both sides of the argument. I've been both an Arminian and I've been a Calvinist. So I have argued both sides of that one.
Hmm. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I would love to delve into that conversation tonight. It's going to be great.
hmm Okay, now getting into today's conversation, which is reasonable beliefs. And I think the goal of the atheist, at least, I speak for myself, but I think this is a general desire of the community, is not that we don't want to believe anything, but we want to believe reasonable things. And we don't find God beliefs to be reasonable. And so the question I wanted to explore today is, how does one keep one's beliefs in the realm of the reasonable?
Hmm. I
What are
think,
your thoughts on that, Josh?
I think that's a very good question because the reality, and I think that all people of different sects, religions, and even non-religions or anti-religions or whatever the situation, whatever category you might be in, right, is that we all want some extent of truth. We want to be the ones that are leading our lives in the best possible way, and I think that is definitely the perspective when I look at what the atheist movement should be, in a sense. I shouldn't say should, but would be better in a sense if we had something that was more along the lines of a truthfulness, right? Like some sort of um, so one thing that I would state is that in order for anything, a belief to be reasonable, the first thing is that you should look at what the belief is in the first place. Like, what are you believing in? And whatever you're believing in doesn't need to have faith involved with it, or can you use reason in order to kind of guide your position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong, I do believe that certain aspects or certain questions that are answered, if not known for sure, do have certain aspects of faith within them, but there should always be more reason rather than the faith that you're putting towards that question that you're asking or answering the question that has been asked, right? Uh,
Okay.
so the first thing that I would say is using the Bayesian theory, because Bayesian theorem puts together sort of like probabilism in a sense. It shows you all these possible probabilities which are out there, and it says put as much emphasis within these probabilities as you possibly can. And when you slowly start to ask Socratic questions about these type of ideas or concepts, the more that you start to see that there's unreasonableness towards that said idea, the more that you should take out the the reasonableness behind it, right? And from there, you can kind of gauge through a type of spectrum through the Bayesian method, and what I would say is aiming for the real as of just being something of just conception, like a thought process or a postulate, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Hmm.
Now, there is a person in the chat right now that I know who it is. He's using the name Angelo Grasso. We all know that this is Otangelo Grasso. And he's asked a question that is not out of line with our topic. So I'm going to go ahead and address it, even though I know there are some in the community that really don't like this person, and with good reason. But his question is, I've yet to see an atheist warrant his belief that nature alone is all that there is and explains our existence. And my first response to that is, not all atheists say that. there seems to be this idea within the Christian community or the believing community that all atheists believe the same thing, and we don't. Just as there is variation among what people in the believing community believe, you have your Muslims and your Christians and your Jewish people and your Hindus and your Baha'is and your Buddhists. And then, even among the Christian believers, you have your Catholics and your Protestants, and among your Protestants, you have your Lutherans and your Methodists. And it just goes on and on and on. And each one has different sets of beliefs, and there's no unity in what all atheists believe either. What you're talking about is the naturalist, and yes, many atheists are naturalists, but not all atheists are naturalists. What are your thoughts on that, Joshua?
I think that you're absolutely correct. I think the beautiful thing about atheism, in a sense, or whatever spectrum you are underneath atheism, secular humanism, naturalist, physicalist, or whatever other thing that you wish to identify underneath the atheist movement, right? I would say you're 100% correct that we all don't follow the same thing. That's why there's a plethora of other ideologies or plethora of other thought processes within the atheist movement. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that any movement can possibly have. If it's too linear, if it's too, let's just say, dogmatic in a sense, then you run into problems, you run into issues. But when you have individuals having different thought processes, you can kind of answer questions better, right? Because not everybody is following in tandem with everybody else.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Ox makes a very good point here. Ox says nature is the only proven creator ever. God is a man-made concept to handle the things around him. And I think Ox is absolutely right that we all know that nature can make things. We see that around us every day. And man makes gods. Even people who are people of faith will agree to that statement because they think that the gods that are not their God are all man-made. And they claim that their God is the real God and has a real existence, and all the rest of the gods are man-made. But my God is different. My God is a real person or is a real thing. And no matter which group of believers you talk to, there's going to be a group of believers that will say, no, your God isn't real.
Exactly. And I think that's the huge point that a lot of believers, but I think the reason why believers have a tendency of aiming at the atheist is because mostly all other believers are believing in a God world, right? And believing in a God world kind of puts you in like the same camp and same category. So you can be enemies of each other's ideas or whatever, but in the end, you're all believing in a God world. So it's kind of like this weird unison, but at the same exact time, individual or this individualism that comes from different belief systems, right? But the thing is that the atheist perspective, I think, is the most terrifying perspective for the theist, right? Because it's kind of like, well, now you're saying that there's no purpose. Now you're saying that everything is material. Now you're saying that everything is natural. And how does that work? And it's kind of like how Antangelo stated. He's like, if you remove God out of any of the equations, he's like, all you get is naturalist mechanisms. So right there, it kind of proves that there's this tendency of fear when it comes to the atheistic thought process, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What I can't answer is, could there be something that is not natural, but is not a person either? Could there be something out there that is a force? And if that force exists, would it be reasonable to call that force God, or is that just another natural force? Is it possible that there is I don't know, if a force is not natural, does it have to be supernatural? Is there any other ground? I don't know the answer to that question. What are your
Well,
thoughts, Josh?
I think that the question that you ask is a really important question too, right?
Hmm.
The question is literally stating that can there be another biological essence of some sort, right? That is
Hmm.
able to either through technology or well, predominantly that's the only way that I can see how something biologically can appear godlike to humans or godlike to lesser life forms in a sense is through technological advancements, right? And it just, I forget who stated that quote, but technology is kind of like the ascension to godhood in and of itself. And if you have something that blows your mind, like I forget where this was, but there was an island off of Madagascar, or was it off of Africa? I forget what it was. And it was the first time the indigenous individuals of that particular island uh, saw airplanes, in a sense, from World War II. And just from that, just by seeing that and them being mind blown that these mechanisms were out there, they started worshiping the people that created these mechanisms that they couldn't understand. So a lot, I think, religions or whatever, their sort of beginnings come from the unknown, the fear of the unknown as well as the awe of the unknown. And I think that's where these belief systems come from. But all in all, as you stated, and just to get back to your point, you're absolutely right. It is. Can we seriously say that there can't be another biological essence being that is out there that has, um, at least to us, godlike potential? We don't
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
But I think the question should be asked, is there something that is immaterial that is out there outside of the universe somehow influencing the universe in and of itself? I think that's the biggest question.
Yeah, that's where I was trying to get to, but I didn't have the correct wording. Thank you. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, we have a super chat from Limited Light who says, before I go north to catch my flight, I did hear Bayes' reasoning mentioned, correct? Please go to my Professor Sergeant Jams page and contact me from the About section. Okay. I will get to that at some point afterward, but I am not familiar with Bayes' reasoning. Joshua, are you familiar with this?
I'm actually learning more about it now because I'm seeing the benefit of Bayes' theory or theorem, I should say, and let alone I'm seeing the benefit of philosophy coming to fruition because I understand that the apologist buries themselves within the philosophy or what I would say quasi philosophy in order to argue their point. And I think that more atheists should lean towards the philosophical perspective in order to bring that argument back at them, you know. But besides that, I'm still learning Bayes's reasoning, and I'll read up on it some more so I have a better understanding of it.
I have been thinking for a while now that I really should take a philosophy course. I did take Philosophy 101 when I was an undergrad in 1980. And I know you were not born in 1980, Joshua. But one thing I am wondering is, were your parents even born in 1980?
they
I'm guessing they were.
they were.
Yeah, they were. But it's hard for me to remember what I learned because that was so long ago. And when I did take philosophy, I was a fairly new Christian and I was scared to death of philosophy because I was afraid that it was going to convince me that my Christian beliefs were wrong, even though the philosophy professor was actually a chaplain. But he was not a Christian according to my very conservative evangelical definition of what a Christian was. He was a very liberal Christian, and to us ultra conservatives, he didn't even make the cut of a Christian, and I was so afraid that he was going to convince me that I was wrong. And that's one thing I find kind of funny today is so many believers will quote Romans 1:20 at me and say that deep down you know there's a God because Romans 1:20 says that everyone knows this deep down. And yet when I was a believer, I was actually the opposite. I was always terrified that somebody was going to convince me that there was no God. And eventually someone did.
Right. And I think that's the beauty of it too. Like a lot of people say, what's the point of having a debate? What's the point of having a discussion if people can't choose what they're convinced of? Right. You're convinced with what you're convinced of and you're kind of stuck with that perspective. But I beg to differ. I do think that there's a battle of ideologies in a sense that happens within the brains of individuals. And the more that you start sort of trying to open up that door, the more you can see these two ideas come into more of a conflict with each other, right? And at some point, one idea needs to give, and the other idea dies out in a sense. And that's why for me, I think that definitely debates are useful, as well as having conversations with individuals who don't have the same exact thought process that you might have or that I might have or whatever, because we can then slowly but surely start to convince individuals that, well, there's certain things that just don't make sense, and let me show you why.
Did you see the comments? I'm sorry that I'm kind of flip-flopping back and forth, which I do because the chat is always of necessity a little bit behind us. But did you see this comment from One Ring?
No, I have not.
Okay. He said, pretty sure that Limited Light wanted your guest to contacted them for an interview. I didn't pick that up. And so thank you, Ring, for pointing that out, that what Limited Light was trying to say was that he or they wanted you to contact them because they would like to have an interview with you.
That would be wonderful. I would love to. I'm on Twitter underneath the same hashtag, underneath the same name that you see right here, Atheist Enlightenment, it's the underscore AE underscore show. And if you see that and you wish to have me on your show, please just write me or message me, and I'll definitely jump at the opportunity. No.
Okay. Limited Light had to leave for the airport, so he probably didn't. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's he or they had to leave, so you'll probably have to contact them.
Oh, makes sense. Makes sense. Then I'll try to find a way to contact them then.
Okay. Purple has an interesting comment. Billions of years ago, aliens visited Earth. They found a lifeless rock. To conserve fuel, standard procedure was dumping garbage before taking off. All life on Earth evolved from the bacteria in that trash.
I love these type of thought processes because it's true, and it's not anything against anybody who believes in ancient alien theories, right? I think that it's, and I'm not saying that they believe in ancient alien theories either. I'm just saying that I've ran into people who actually do believe in these type of things, and for me, I find it mind-boggling how certain individuals just can't believe that ancient humans can create certain artifacts, you know? And let alone, if we go back even with biology, right? There's more evidence now for panspermia, and definitely from Mars and from the moon as well, because the moon was once bigger or whatever. Well, not the moon, but the moon came from two planets, Earth and planet, crashing into each other, and then after a while formulating what we now see as the moon today after billions of years. And let alone panspermia from Mars, or one of the hypotheses, I'm not trying to say it's validated, but one of the hypotheses is that Mars, something happened with Mars that was able to pass on its biological materials to Earth in and of itself. So if that is the truth, then that is really interesting. but
Mhm.
the question still lies, though, if that's the
Mhm.
reality of situations or not.
And thank you for the super sticker, Esther. Okay, Purple also had another comment, and this is one that I really, really shy away from, Purple. Purple says, if you were always afraid of that, it suggests you were not completely convinced. And I shy away from that because that suggests that I was never a real Christian, which is what a lot of the believers say in the first place. But on the other hand, with the way that I lived my life as a believer, there is no way that I could have lived it any more toward being that. I mean, I think all people in any belief system have periods of doubt, and I definitely went through periods where I had no doubts, but I also, yes, definitely had periods of doubt as well.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
I
Go
think
ahead.
that I think that most atheists, I'm not going to say all because I know that there are some that are cradle atheists, but I think most atheists come from religious backgrounds and
Mm,
once had as much fervor as any other theist that comes on now and states, well, you're not a real theist, right? You're not a real this or you're not a real that. And it's like, well, to you now, you might say that, but there might be something that convinces you into my position. It might not be because of me stating things, but it could be because you heard an argument from somebody else who's more eloquent than I am, or who asked the right question that all of a sudden jogged your mind into thinking, wow, I don't understand this. And all of a sudden, the more further you get in down that rabbit hole, the more you start to realize that, wow, my belief system is not at all what I thought it was in the first place. And then you'll be in the same, or not you, but they will be in the same category as we are after a while. And then,
mhm.
and that's what I sometimes say to my friends afterwards that have decided to come into atheism. I'm like, so I guess you weren't a true theist after all, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a joke there, but for me, it's kind of insulting when it comes from believers, because if they could see how I lived my life, they could never say that.
Hmm.
Now, that's one thing we did not discuss, which is your background. Were you raised in a belief system?
I was. I was raised Catholic until I was 15. Then there were certain questions that I had when I was 15, and converted to or reverted to Islam, as they would say, for
Mhm.
until I was 20. Then was a Buddhist for a year, and then came into atheism, and now I'm a Gnostic atheist. So.
Okay. And what were the things that broke the Catholic faith for you?
I think the things that broke the Catholic faith for me was at first I would have to say purgatory because purgatory is not written within the Bible at all. Like there
Mhm.
is no purgatoristic area within biblical literature. If you don't follow God, well, you're sent exactly straight to hell. And if you do believe in God, then you are actually brought to heaven. There is no middle grounds in that.
Mhm.
And I was wondering where the Catholics actually had that said idea in the first place, and it kind of seemed unscriptural to me in a sense. Um,
True, but doesn't the Catholic Church say that not all of their belief system comes from the Bible? That part is from the Bible, part is it from church tradition, and part is edict from the Pope.
oh, absolutely, they do state that, but the Pope is supposed to be this mediator, a God to the people in a sense. So he needs to, in a certain extent, follow the biblical narrative. And definitely, well, I'm talking about before Second Vatican, right? Because Second Vatican kind of threw everything away and just stated people can believe what they want to believe. But or not okay, that's negative. That's a negative. Let me reframe that. Is that as long as you believe in God, and as long as you follow certain things within the biblical scriptures, then you are
Mhm.
okay and you are able to get to heaven and so on and so forth. However, the thing is that if you go back to the original Vatican, you had to follow things to a T. That's why there was so much oppression on people who didn't think the same way as the priests and didn't follow the Bible to a T. It was only after the conquest of what is now known as Italy to the king of, I think it was Syracuse. No, not Syracuse. I think it was Sicily or something towards that extent. And once Italy was united, then we slowly but surely started to see this new, what would be called Second Vatican come to fruition. But even then, my thought process was that God has written the Bible for people to follow. God did not just write the Bible for people to cherry pick or for a human being to be like, hey, this is the, you can choose whatever you want. If you think that, whatever the situation may be, being gay is okay, let's just say, well, then that's perfectly fine. Like, no, inside literature or inside the scriptures, it says that it's wrong and it's an abomination towards God itself. So to me, I was like, well, why is the Vatican not following suit with what the Bible is saying? And that's one of the big things that kind of turned me off to Catholicism. But then after the more in-depth I started to go, just like with the Trinity and Jesus rising again from the dead, slowly but surely, Islam started to seem like more the rational belief system than Christianity did.
Now, when you turned to the Muslim faith, how did you find the community? And when I say that, I don't mean the process of how you find it, but did you find them very loving and accepting of you? Did you kind of find family there, or did you feel kind of like an outsider because your family was not Muslim?
I think in the beginning I felt like a bit of an outsider because it was my grandfather who kind of like brought me into it, because he was also at that point a revert as well. So when you're going in and you're sort of I guess you can say checking out what the religion is about and everything like that, and the Muslim individuals are amazing people when it comes to that. They'll really be like, we'll come in, we'll explain it to you, and it obviously it matters what school of thought you're in, because there's a plethora of there's 5 schools of thought within Islam when you're talking about the Sunnis, and there's, I believe, 2 schools of thought within the Shia belief system. And when you're looking, like for me, I was more of a Hanafi, so that is more like looking at the Quran and looking at, or is it Malaki? No, I was a Malaki. My apologies. So that is looking at the Quran and the Hadith as like laws, in a sense. So those are specific laws that you need to follow, and you need to follow the Hadiths as well, because those have important information for you, in a sense, as a human being, in order to follow in Muhammad's footsteps, so that you can be the perfect, or maybe not the perfect, because he was the perfect, but you can kind of model your life underneath his perfect image, in a sense. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, what broke the Islamic faith for you?
Multiple things. Because most of the time, a lot of individuals, like you probably heard about the Kalam cosmological argument being argued a couple of times, and that was something that kind of won me over in the beginning, because I was like, it's true. If the universe has a beginning and you can't go back infinite amount of time, then there has to be something that created it all, right? And then does that mean that thing now obviously thinking about that is absolutely irrational and nonsensical, but back in that time I was like, oh well, it makes all the sense. And as I stated beforehand, it's easier for you to navigate through the God world and harder to navigate into the non-God world, in a sense. So what ended up breaking Islam for me was the way that it kind of treats women as like children, in a sense, because let alone for me, I used to think that way as well until I got into Egypt and I got into university. And then I started to realize that there was women that had much more intelligence than I had, and blew my mind over that prospect as well. Because that's another thing based on religions, is that they like to kind of isolate you in a sense so that you feel that their way of thinking is the best way of thinking, until you start going out there and you start seeing like, oh, okay, well, this was wrong. And oh, okay, this was wrong. And another thing that got me was the story of Muhammad splitting the moon, and the moon coming back again, or coming back together. And it was sort of like, yeah, it was weird. It was extremely weird to me how somebody, like, how rational it seemed to be, and after it had like these weird stories that sort of back the rationale, you know. And the other thing that got to me too, because in high school I started to become a little more liberal, I guess you can say, than conservative. So again, the other thing was that I didn't understand how something can create individuals and then despise the individuals that they created, right? And to me, it didn't make sense. I'm like, you're the one that created that. Why would you hate something that you created unless you made a mistake, but you couldn't back down on your mistake? But then again, if you make a mistake, you're not all powerful to begin with.
And that is my greatest beef with the Calvinists is, if according to the Calvinist, the only ones that are saved are the chosen, and they were chosen before creation. And they were chosen not on the basis of anything that they said or did, but just because that was God's sovereign will to choose those as opposed to any others. And in their view, the vast majority of created humans were created destined to hell. And I keep asking, well, why would God make them? That doesn't make any sense.
Right?
Why not just not make them?
Right. And the question that always gets me, at least if you're a Calvinist or a Reformed theist, right? You're in with Reformed theology, is that I constantly hear, well, people still have will. People still have free will. But I'm like, but no, you don't, because your story was already preordained from beginning. So there is no free will. Your story has already been written. It's sort of like trying to create a nouveau story for the Lord of the Rings or something like that, when the story has already been written by Tolkien.
J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah.
So that's the whole entire perspective that I don't understand, at least on the Calvinist end and at least on the Reformed theologists end, is that why are you even preaching? You shouldn't even preach. You should just be within your small group, kind of like Jehovah's Witness, or kind of like Jehovah's Witness does knock on people's doors, so they don't stay in their own group.
I do know the answer to that question if you're interested.
I'm very interested. Please, yeah.
The answer is because we don't know who the chosen ones are. And maybe there's somebody out there that is a chosen one, but has never heard the word of God. And so when you tell them the word of God, when you preach to them, then because they are a chosen one, God's Spirit will then speak to them, and they will suddenly understand, and then they will turn to God. And basically, God will use them to draw them at that point, even though it was inevitable that they would be drawn. God might be using you as to be the one that draws them. That's the rationale.
Interesting. Okay. But again, I do find it kind of, well, maybe not contradictory, but the only person who can change somebody's mind is God himself, or itself, I should say. So if God is the only thing that can change your mind, then no matter how many people who are speaking to you or how many people are trying to influence you, the only thing that can actually show you that God is real is God. Right?
Yes, so, and that is exactly their theology. In fact, they say that Christ's death on the cross was a limited atonement, that God never intended Jesus to die for anyone except the elect. And so when you read John 3:16 and you read, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him. It's not whosoever believes in him. It's whosoever believes shall have eternal life. And
Mhm.
only those who were chosen are in that group of whosoever believes, because only the chosen are able to believe.
That is very interesting. Okay. Now I've
Hmm.
learned something new.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. But
Yeah, I was a
then,
Calvinist for over a decade.
but at the same time, and I would like to ask you this as well. Sorry about that. I know that it was me who's a guest on the show, but
Oh, no, you are more than welcome. It's my favorite topic of conversation.
Well, my thing is that how can a Calvinist, right, or Reformed theist say that they have morals or values when, let's just say, with God, anything that God states is looked at as good. So if God states that you should wipe out that entire village, then as a Calvinist or Reformed theist, you should do it without any hesitation. But
Exactly.
for
Hmm.
me, that doesn't necessarily show any moral values. That shows the immorality of that thought process, in a sense, or that the person in and of themselves have what is it called? It's not an objective moral, but it's actually relative based on God's relativity, based on the individuals that God sees as a threat, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So if that
Hmm.
is the case, then I wonder why Calvinists or Reformed theologists constantly talk about morals or values when that doesn't necessarily seem to be within their realm of expertise. If they're going to say everything that God states or does is moral.
Well, they would say that the Bible tells you what those morals are, but it doesn't, kind of like the US Constitution is a framework.
Hmm.
And what we do and the laws that we pass are supposed to fit within that framework. And the Bible is God telling us what those moral standards are. And we are supposed to determine our behavior based on that moral framework.
Interesting. Hmm.
Mhm.
Okay.
I wanted to get to Purple's point here because this is one that I did struggle with for a bit as a believer. If you can never change God's mind, what is the point of prayer? Aren't you asking God to do a favor and change his plan? And the answer is you are and you aren't. According to the Calvinist, even though you are praying that someone would be saved, you're not really praying for God to save them. You're praying in hopes that they were one of the chosen. And if you're praying that you get a particular job, you're praying in hopes that God has already chosen that this is what's going to happen. And the real purpose of prayer isn't to convey your thoughts to God, or it's twofold. One is so that you're spending time with God and so that you are cultivating that relationship. And second, corporate prayer is a big deal because it allows you to share your needs with the community and the community to share their needs with you. And by praying, you learn what each other's needs are, and you are able to support one another. So those are the twofold purposes to prayer. It's a community thing, and it's cultivating your relationship with God. That's how they would answer that.
Interesting. Huh. Hmm. No, that I actually. But again, the one thing is because and now don't get me wrong, I know this is only my formulation of what I would think a God is, and that doesn't necessarily matter when we're talking about scripture or anything like that. But I look at more of like the Buddhist way of how people get to quote unquote nirvana, for instance. Like the whole entire point before you get to that pinnacle is that one must get rid of all attachments, right? So for
Hmm.
me, my number one thing is that the more of absolute something gets, right, that means that the more content they are within the realm that they're in. And for me, the argument that I have, or the thing that stumbles my mind, is that what brought something that was absolute in order to create in the first place? Because it doesn't make any sense to me that something that is all-knowing, almighty, all the omnipresence, or as Muslims like to say, absolute, an essence is, then it should be okay with the realm that it was prior to creating. So what was the means of creation in the first place? Why did something startle it in order to create in the first place? When there was aeons or an ad infinitum amount of time in the past where it didn't have a universe to work with, right? And that's the thing that gets me. And another thing is based on the immaterial of an essence, because in the end, what it makes me seem is that the theist is saying that everything came from nothing. Because when you hear about immaterial, what does immaterial really sound like when you start getting to the bottom of it? It sounds like does not exist in the end. Because once you start breaking it down and you start asking more Socratic questions to the theist, all it just seems is that, well, now we're in the realm of agnosticism now. They're not really a Gnostic theist anymore. They're an agnostic theist based on the God that they believe, that they worship. And then the more questions you start answering from that, or start asking from there, then all of a sudden it seems like, well, now you're talking about something that doesn't exist in the first place, right? So it's very interesting when you start breaking it down in those type of angles. I'm sorry, you had something that was up beforehand. I do apologize.
I did, but before I get to that, there's a lot going on in the chat with a controversial person who I just put into timeout because he is causing too much trouble in the chat, and so he is now timed out. And mods, if he comes back, you are free to time him out again, or even banish him as he is causing too much friction. Okay, yeah, I brought up a comment from Boomer who said, "It is the mouth of God that causes the problems. They are all human mouths and say dumb stuff." This brings us to an idea that I thought was quite interesting, and I heard it from a believer who was talking about, you know, when you talk about people who are unreached, people who don't know who God is, there are the completely unreached, people who have never heard the gospel, and there are the what was the word he used? The under I can't remember what the word was they used, but it was a really funny word to basically say that there's also those who have heard such a mangled version of the gospel that you really can't say that they've ever heard the gospel. And to me, that is absolutely mind-boggling that anyone that would be an all-powerful God would be so hurt by what some person is thinking about them that they would say, okay, I can't even stand your presence. You go off to an eternity in hell because I don't like your thoughts. That is mind-bogglingly stupid.
No, I completely agree. But I think the biggest question of them all, because when you're in court, what is the worst forms of testimony? Is eyewitness testimony. Now, what is the number one thing that God utilizes in order to prove himself? A book that anybody could use, and let alone anybody can interpret within their own personal ways. Now, for me, my number one thing is to ask, there's so many other areas for one person, or for an almighty being or an absolute being to kind of zap you with that information. And definitely, if we're going to say that everybody has a soul, right? Well, then that makes sense that God would zap you within that that soul, in a sense, in order to make you feel its presence. So the question is that if this is the case, then why are there a number, or an ever-growing number, of disbelievers within these particular faiths? There should be more of a draw towards these faiths, or the real faith to begin with, in order to kind of see like, okay, we're seeing something here. We're seeing a pattern of people moving towards something that seems truthful or whatever. But in a sense, we're seeing more people leaving religions than ever before in history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's,
Mm-hmm.
again, it's thanks to individuals such as yourself, and thanks to individuals such as people who came beforehand, who brought these type of arguments up and started to show people that this is absolutely ridiculous, that these thought processes just don't make sense to begin with, and that there's a lot of things that they leave open than actually answering. And I think that's something that's really good that our community has shown.
Jeff, Godless Scummer, says, I was handed a leaflet today called "Is It Wise to Be an Atheist?" I think I now have content for my next stream.
Yeah, I get those too a lot of times, where because I'm in the foot traffic of Jehovah's Witness and Mormons and all the rest of that. And because I'm very open with my belief, in a sense, I'm very open with what I am, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I bring those individuals inside my own establishment and have conversations and everything like that with them. So now they're trying to convince me by putting in leaflets and pamphlets based on, yeah, exactly. So it's funny just seeing what he wrote.
And Randolph Richardson responded, I have a book called Lord of the Rings, but I don't profess that Gandalf was real.
How dare you, Randolph? Gandalf was absolutely a real character. It was based off of Merlin.
Speaking of people coming around and finding out what you believe, one thing that was really interesting is I have a neighbor who is a Muslim. And when I was a believer, I had a neighborhood Bible study, and I had opened it up to people of other faiths, and she came a couple times. And she and her husband have an interfaith religious group at their mosque, where they invite people of other faiths to come in. And I did not see her for a couple of years because of the pandemic. And when I did see her again, I was very hesitant to say anything about my beliefs, only because, not because I was trying to hide my beliefs, but because her husband had been absolutely fanatical about taking care of their yard. And it was very clear that it had not been cared for in the last year. And I was concerned that possibly something had happened to her husband. And I was waiting for her to share her big news because I felt that her big news was bigger than mine. Well, as it turned out, her husband was fine. For whatever reason, he simply lost interest in the yard work. And so when she found out I was an atheist, she was absolutely flabbergasted. And, how could you not lead with this? And I didn't tell her my reasoning, that I was afraid something had happened to her husband. But what she then said after that just astounded me, was, so what do you do about the creator and about creation? There is no creator. There is no creation. And she said, well, you know that evolution is a lie. And I was like, oh my gosh. Even when I was a believer, I believed in evolution. I had no idea. And I was just flabbergasted that she would take this position, because one of her children is a medical doctor. And I'm thinking, how can you have a child that is a medical doctor whose entire profession is dependent on evolution, and you claim that evolution didn't happen?
Yeah. I am sad to say, but I was part of that group of individuals before I went into my or delved into anthropology, and then after slowly but surely, I was like, okay, yeah, my mind obviously changed, but I was very combative in the first place, because a lot of people think, well, evolution and God can coexist side by side. The reality is that I don't believe they can. Because if you're stating that God created human beings from lesser beings and somehow bestowed a soul upon this lesser being in order for it to become what man is now, or human beings are now, it kind of takes away that majesty, right? Like the humans are different from other animals because they have some kind of divine right to be that particular being to begin with. You add evolution in there and you completely and absolutely destroy that divine right from the get-go. You're stating that all other human beings are just from this literally goo, in a sense, like how you hear all these other theists state, well, you're saying that I'm from goo, or you're saying that I'm from a fish, or you're saying that I'm from a monkey, or whatever the situation may be, even though that is not the reality of the situation, but still, that's how they see it, right? And it takes away from the divine nature of God bestowing upon you this right.
I think Dr. Joshua Swami does the best job of it, of trying to merge the two. And his theory is plausible because his theory is that humans evolved and that God made this special place called Eden, and he made a special creation of Adam and Eve. And once they fell and he banished them from the garden, they left the garden and went and mated with and joined the community of the naturally evolved humans.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. But in the end, the aspect, and let alone, this mostly goes with Christian theology rather than Islamic theology, but let alone the fall in and of itself, right? Like that would have made sense with the fall, the more, let's just say, quote unquote, I don't want to say devolved, but the more one's mental capacities dropped over time would make perfect sense. And that would kind of equate to a fallen world. But in a sense, what I see is the opposite. We're starting to get way more intelligent than the individuals that came prior to, right? And it doesn't necessarily make sense that this would come from a world that has fallen. At least in my opinion. And that's why that was another thing that kind of more recently made me push back off with Christianity as well.
I had intended to only go for an hour, but I'm going to let us go a little bit longer because there's one more question that I'd really like to ask you. Having been a Muslim for a short time, and, I just told you about the situation with my neighbor who is Muslim and who was just flabbergasted that I could believe that evolution was real. I was very surprised at that perspective because my understanding of the Muslim community was that it is a very scientific community, and we do have a number of discoveries that came from the Muslim community. Did you find when you were a member that they were generally science acceptors, science deniers, or a mix of both?
Well, I think it's definitely a mix of both because,
Okay.
again, it matters based on the school of thought that you're talking about within Islam. Like if you're looking at like the Wahhabis, for instance, well, those individuals are a lot more, let's just say, literal with the way that they read the Quran. So there is no possible way that a Wahhabist would believe in evolution because that just takes away from God's greatness to begin with. How could you have lesser beings, as I stated beforehand, go into greater beings such as ourselves? And then after, if we're looking at the others, just like Hanafi, for instance, or Malaki thought processes, we would see more or less of both. You would see that, let's just say with evolution, there would be certain individuals that would agree with it, but they would put stipulations to it as well. So it's like, oh, I agree, but I think that God didn't create like Homo erectus or something like that. But only once we became human, then God bestowed his majesty upon the human race, in a sense. And then after a while, even that has its issues and problems. But I would say that it's a mixed bag. And that's why, even though that we have the belief system, like there's a lot that comes from the Islamic culture and history that is based scientifically, but at the same time, there's also certain aspects that fight back or fight against the sciences. And that's why, sadly, nowadays we barely see anything that comes out of the Islamic community that has anything based on science or whatever, or predominantly within only Pakistan or something like that, where you can have somebody who's like a mathematician or something like that that won a Nobel Peace Prize. But that's predominantly it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. And I realized that I pinned the wrong tweet or the wrong thing when I started this. So I just put up a new pinned message. And the pinned message is the link to Atheist Enlightenment's channel. And if you are not subscribed, please go and subscribe now. There's 32 people watching this show right now. And at the moment, Atheist Enlightenment has 28 subscribers. So
wow.
I know you can give him a couple more.
This is amazing. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. You're all amazing. Thank you.
Okay. And Randolph Richardson is the president of the Canadian Atheists, and he also can help you out by getting you on some lists of atheists within the Canadian atheist community as well. So you might want to hit up Randolph after the video.
Yeah, Randolph is an amazing individual. I've had talks with him on Discord and everything prior to, and we were planning on a beforehand after COVID collaborating with each other and stuff like that based on our two communities and stuff. So yeah, I think that would be fantastic.
Okay, cool. You are now up to 32 subscribers. So thank you, everyone who has subscribed to Atheist Enlightenment.
Much appreciated, everybody. Thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Okay. And thank you very much for coming on. This has been a wonderful talk. I've learned some interesting things from this talk, and it's been a lot of fun. I have a new produced video that just released a couple of minutes ago, and it is called Soul Survivor, The Evolution of Souls, and it is from a Catholic priest who tries to talk about evolution and tries to merge evolution with Catholic faith, but he doesn't do very good. So, and then tonight, if you want to see Atheist Enlightenment and myself again, at 9 p.m. tonight, I will be on his channel. And before we go, Joshua, do you have any closing thoughts? And is there anything else you want to show for?
Oh, absolutely. So yes, just like how Godless Granny stated, tonight me and Godless Granny and I are going to have a conversation based on free will and actually do a deep dive into those concepts. So if you're really interested in the free will conversation, please come on by. If you're on Eastern Standard Time, it's at 10 p.m. If you're in Central Standard Time, it's at 9. And if you're in, I forget what PST stands for, but if you're in the PST Standard Time, then it's at 7 o'clock. So if you're interested, come on by, and we're actually going to, as I stated, do a deep dive into free will. And tomorrow, I'm going to have on a friend of mine who is a determinist. And we're actually going to do a deep dive into determinism and see what the models of determinism there are, and really just flush it out more for the individual. Because I think there's a lot of clashes between free will and determinism, but I don't think that there's a lot just discussing the topic matter separately and talking about free will and talking about determinism in and of themselves. So I think there's going to be two great shows that are going to come today and tomorrow. So if you're interested, stay tuned, and we'll give you these great shows.
And Joshua, we just exceeded our goal. My goal for this show was to double the number of subs that you have. You now have 39.
What?
So yes, you have more than doubled your subs just during this last hour.
Oh my God. Oh, as I stated, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank your viewers enough. You are all fantastic. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for coming. Thank you all in the chat. Thank you all of you for subscribing to Joshua's channel, and we'll get that channel going. And see you tonight. Live your life.